don't think anybody did. Just take your vote.
Just so the audience knows that the board held a workshop on Monday, and prior to that, the Finance Committee went completely through this budget line by line and recommended it to the board, and then the board went through it in detail prior to the meeting, and then on Monday at the workshop had a number of questions that they answered, and management responded, and the treasurer, Kevin Crystal. Just from management side, we think this is a very good budget, and both the board and I are extremely happy that we could put this forth again for the third year with no operational increase in the assessment. I'm really proud of the management team that we have here, and this board supports that management team.
May I add that the Finance Committee did make some recommendations and
which we accepted. Yeah, all of them.
I mean, so there were comments made regarding.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, right. Yeah, we accepted some of it, except some of it. Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to call this meeting to order. Proof of notice, Kim?
Notice mailed to all the residents more than 14 days prior to the meeting and posted in the clubhouse.
Proof of quorum. We have 6 board members here. Director Val Page cannot be here today. President's remarks. No specific remarks. Turn it over to our treasurer or Kevin Crystal.
Can you hear me okay? We don't need a microphone? Okay. As Bill mentioned, we went Monday, the board did, through budget presentation, and what I'm going to do now is this is very similar to the presentation that we gave to the board on Monday. So the board has been through all of this already, but this is really meant for the residents to hear what we have to say about the budget and really to answer any questions that you might have. So the first slide, what this is attempting to do is, back around July or August, Bill and his staff did a forecast of where they thought we would come out at the end of the year in terms of income. And the forecast back then in July and August showed us with a forecasted income of about $200,000. So what that means is the $175 a month that you folks are paying in a monthly assessment generated, or was forecasted to generate a $200,000 profit. Okay? But if you look at the if you look at the 2011 budget, that same $175 is now going to generate zero income. So I think it's important to know, okay, how did we get $200,000 out of the $175 a month, and now we're going to get zero? And that's what this is attempting to do, to show you what the increased expenses are that are eating into that $200,000 profit that we're expecting to make this year and that we're not expecting to make next year. Okay? So the first net increase from the forecast to the 2011 budget is a food and beverage net increase in expenses of $43,000. Now, where that comes from, and again, we went into detail with that with the board on Monday, is a net $37,000 of expenses are being transferred from the member service department into the food and beverage department. So the lion's share of that increase is merely coming from a transfer from one department to another. Okay? The golf, as you know, we had an amenity analysis in, and they came up with some recommendations, with many of which we've adopted. But nevertheless, the net expense for golf is meant to increase by about $39,000. Okay? Now you have to remember, this is just a change. This is not the entire expense for golf. It's just a change from the forecast to the 2011 budget. We've increased the contingency. Okay, from what was in the forecast to the 2011 budget. We've got legal services going up. A sinkhole investigation has increased. We spent $10,000 this year. We've got in the budget $35,000, so that net increase is $25,000. And I'm going to go through later on with you with some of the risks that are in that budget related to some of these numbers. But this is just trying to explain how we go from the $200,000 profit to a zero profit next year. The common ground utilities, that's the water, reclaimed water, the electricity, etc., going up, rates going up. Bad debts going up, again, I'm sure we're all aware of the economic climate we're in, that, foreclosures are a major problem right now with mortgages and whatnot. So this is expecting some increase in delinquent assessments. And then the last three items are insurance rates are going up. Facilities that are experiencing the same thing common grounds are, increased propane, water, etc. And then all other net is another $11,000. So if you add all of those up, then total increase in expenses is a little over $250,000, which, as you can see, wipes out the entire $200,000 income that we had in the forecast. But now, partially offsetting that is we will not have an amenity analysis expense as we did this year. We won't have it next year, so we're going to save 35 grand in that. We're not anticipating some sod replacement that we had to do this year, so we got $10,000 savings in that. We're not going to have a long-range planning consultant next year, so we got $6,000 savings there. And we're not going to be, this is a long story, I'll make it short. We had to pay a village for some potable water that they were using to water our common grounds, and we reimbursed them. But that's been solved now, so we won't have that expense either. So that's a net savings of a little over $55,000. Okay? So if you take the two together, so here's what I was talking about. We have a forecast this year of $200,000, and we have a budget next year of zero income. So what happened is we had those expense increases that we just went through of the $256,000, and we had the savings of the $55,000. The net of those two wipes out the gain from the forecast. Okay? Now this is the schedule that, I don't want to go into too much detail, but I think all residents should understand. These are now the actual numbers we have in the budget for these particular accounts, all right? And they're highlighted as being significant estimates, because that's exactly what they are. They are only estimates. The reclaimed water, we have roughly $156,000 in there. Our actual expense this year, by the end of the year, will be about only $70,000. So you say, well, how do we go from $70,000 to $156,000? The $70,000 comes about because the county, in the last few months, has not billed us for any reclaimed water. They had an excess supply of reclaimed water, so they sent us a letter saying, use all the reclaimed water you want, we're not billing you for it. Earlier in the year, even when they were billing us for the reclaimed water, they were billing us incorrectly. As an example, we pay roughly 74 cents per 1,000 gallons for reclaimed water, and we probably use, according to Tommy Land, 20 to 25 million gallons of water per month. All right? In some of the months when they did their calculation, they would bill us $1,400, and they should have billed us $14,000. So this number here is as good an estimate as we can come up with as to what we think we'll be paying for reclaimed water next year. Now, quite honestly, if they get wise and they fix that meter and they understand how to bill us, and they bill us for all the water we use, we'll be paying more than $200,000 for reclaimed water. But they have never done that yet. It's not as if this year is the one year is a fluke. In previous years, they have never billed us for the right amount of water that we've used. So that's a huge estimate in our budget. It could go up. It could be too high. Bad debts, as we talked about earlier. This is assuming that we have a few more foreclosures. But again, if the economy gets worse and the foreclosures increase, that number's not enough. The other side of the coin is we are getting money back from foreclosures that we filed 3 years ago. We're starting to get that money back. If more money comes in, then that number's too high. We can't predict. So we got a best estimate as to what we think bad debts will be next year. Legal services. Every year, we put in a budget $35,000 for, under the assumption that we may get sued once. And if we do get sued and we lose, we have a $35,000 deductible. So there's an assumption in there that we will, and I'm not saying that it'll happen, but for financial purposes, we're assuming we would get sued once and lose a case, and that's $35,000. Once again, if we don't get sued, or if we get sued and don't lose the case, that's $35,000 that's in the budget that we don't need. The other side of the coin is if we get sued twice and we lose both cases, then that number's not enough. Okay? Sinkholes. We have $35,000. Remember I told you we have $10,000 this year. We now have $35,000. Once again, if we have 3 or 4 sinkholes and we have to repair those, that number's not enough. If we're lucky enough not to have any, that number's too high. And to counterbalance all of that somewhat is a contingency number of 66 grand. But that contingency number can be used for just about anything. It could be used in case we're off here a little bit. It also can be used, and we'll go on to it later, in case if the revenue numbers for golf that we put in the budget don't come to fruition. we might need to tap that. That number essentially is just a plug number. Is if this budget was 100% accurate, at the end of the year, we would have a $66,000 surplus, because we would not use the contingency. Okay? Okay, which gets us to golf. If you look at the annual 18-hole prepaid, this is the number. We've gone from 270 down to 235. We're now expecting an increase up to 250. Okay? In previous years, back in 2006, 7, 8, et cetera, this number, the annual prepaid, has been on a constant decline. So you can see we're now saying that in 2011 that decline is going to reverse. That's a pretty aggressive assumption. Okay? The reason why we put it in there is because we've lowered the rates on prepaid, and the assumption is if we lower the rates, we may have more people sign up for it. But again, you know, the board and management has to be aware we're talking about a fairly significant reversal of trend, so that there's a risk in that number. Seasonal is not so bad. That's been flat at about 89, 90, and we think it'll go up to 110. That to me is probably a realistic number, because once again we lowered the seasonal, and the seasonal is kind of a nice package to have if you are a snowbird. Annual prepaid 9-hole, not too much change there. Trackage is going up, the single trackage, because again we've lowered the rates from $600 down to $400, so that's a pretty substantial drop. So we're expecting that to go up. The double trackage is essentially flat. That went from $685 down to $600. Okay. So here's the revenue now. So we've got an expected increase in annual prepaid at $375, and you see the seasonal increase, essentially a minor decline in annual prepaid. However, the trackage, again, when you combine single and double trackage, that number is actually down. There's a roughly $22,000 increase in daily fees, and again, that's related to lowering the daily fee revenue, so we think the volume will increase there. And the same thing with the guest rates, they were lowered. So essentially we're saying golf is going to be flat, but again, this is the big risk number. It's the number we had to adjust earlier this year, if you recall, with the budget adjustment, and it's possible we may have to do it again. We'll have to see. But So what these last two slides were meant to do is to show the risk in those accounts, reclaimed water, et cetera, that the budget or the actual numbers could come in higher or lower, and the risk in the revenue, particularly for golf in the budget. And then this is the food and beverage gross profit analysis. What this is this is the 2010 numbers, the 2011 budget numbers, and then this is the industry average that came to us from that McCladrey pull-in amenity analysis report. And so if you look, the gross profit on the food sales, now what that is the food sales less the cost of the food sales. So it doesn't include any payroll or any linen, things like that. So the gross profit is expected to go up in 2011, but it is slightly, and it's slightly higher than the industry average. The alcohol sales are meant to go up in 2011, but they're a little bit below the industry average. And then the combined gross profit, again, is up from last year, and it's also higher than the industry average. And then if you look again now at the payroll and benefits, and this is a negative number, by the way, these are all positive numbers, so this is an expense number, so it's a negative. And if you can see, the negative number went up. And again, that's because, if you recall, we were talking about moving expenses out of member services and into food and beverage. That's what's causing that increase. Okay? And the other expenses are pretty much in line, between 14, 15, 16%. So the total food and beverage loss for 2011, mostly because of that taking on the expenses from member services, is going to be 20.7% versus 14% last year and versus 41% in the industry average. Okay? And so what that means, again, putting it in layman's terms, that means for every dollar we take in on food and beverage, we lose 20 cents or 21 cents. Okay? So that's an overview for the operating budget. Now, and this is a summary of the reserve budget. Okay? So,
can I ask a question?
Sure.
Could you drop back one to the golf revenue?